Hello and welcome to another episode of India and Global Left. If you are new to the show, please smash that subscribe button. Also consider becoming a YouTube member, a Patreon, or donate small amount given in the link in the description box. Let me welcome our guest tonight, Dr. Vijay Prasad. Dr. Prasad is a historian, an author, a journalist, and well-known critic of imperialism. Vijay, welcome back to India and Global Left.
Hey, it's great to be with you. It's one of my favorite shows. Okay.
Thank you so much. I wanted to focus on Venezuela today with you. Have our viewers have some update on what has been happening since January 3 when the US regime or administration, as you would like to call it, kidnapped Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro. And you have been having discussions about imperialism with many people in the last decades or so. So, first off, how would you describe or explain the kidnapping of Venezuelan president by the U.S. administration?
I mean, it's an illegal act. You can't just come into a country and grab a head of state. There are so many laws violated. The UN Charter was violated. The head of state immunity was violated. The Organization of American States Charter was violated. I mean, you can keep going. Yeah, it was a complete flagrant disregard of international law. And then on top of that, the indictment against Nicolas Maduro Moros and Celia Flores was ridiculous. I read the 20 odd pages of the indictment. After they had arrived in New York, the United States, in fact, pulled one of the key parts of the charge against President Maduro, which is that he's the leader of the Cartel de los Sols gang. And and they had to admit, as we have all been writing now, at least I wrote something over a year ago, that there is no such thing called the Cartel of the Suns. It was a made up term made up by Venezuelan journalists in the 1990s. And the US government had to pull that, had to take it out of the indictment. What's left? That he has guns? I mean, US has no jurisdiction of that, whether it's true or not. There's no evidence of narco terrorism. It's an absolutely ridiculous indictment. It was based on that indictment that enormous military operation took place, and 100 plus people were killed, Venezuelans and Cubans. What is this? It's crazy.
And how does it look like from the perspective of the region at large? Of course, Cuba is very important, which has been under the US seas, but we have seen recently this so-called new Monroe Doctrine, which has kind of escalated the historical US strangulation of the region. So if you are someone located in Latin America, or for that matter in Central America, how does this abduction or kidnapping look like from their perspective?
Well, firstly, it was enormously shocking that the United States has the kind of weaponry. I think people underestimated the kind of weaponry the US has. The last time we've seen a full barrage against a country was around 21, 22, 23 years ago. And that was when the US entered Iraq in 2003, in full force. Yes, of course, the NATO planes bombed Libya. There's been bombings in Syria, bombings in Somalia, northern Nigeria. I mean, Yemen, you name it. Yeah. But this was and of course, the largest of them all, Afghanistan and Iran, but that was not a full-scale attack against the air defense systems. Here the United States went, decapitated the air defense systems. They have some pretty sophisticated sonic weaponry. They, as Trump said, we have the ability to make a country go dark. They did that. That's impressive and scary. Countries are afraid. Even Gabriel Boric in Chile, who has been really unfairly critical of the Venezuelan government, Mr. Boric said that day itself, he said that if today Venezuela, tomorrow anybody. So on the one side, it's really rattled people. They now can see that this Monroe Doctrine with a Trump corollary comes with this kind of military hardware. I think that's important to first say. In Venezuela itself, this has really rattled the country because despite the fact that acting President Delcy Rodríguez has said, we're going to continue the revolution and so on, they don't want to see the United States turn Caracas into Gaza. They know the US has the capacity to do that, and they are unwilling to risk, I don't know, tens of thousands of Venezuelan lives, for the sake of being stubborn on this. They are going to find another way to resist the United States. Right now, the situation is find a way to bring the temperature down, which is the reason why they are negotiating with the US government. I mean, they want anything short of surrender. I think that's important. The United States has the military capacity to destroy Venezuela. Does it have the political capacity to govern Venezuela? No. And I'm sure we'll get into that. But even Donald Trump admitted that the US government's chosen opposition is simply not popular in Venezuela. I mean, he said so. Yeah, he said so.
So, Edmundo Gonzalez, or for that matter, Maria Corina Machado, they are extremely, extremely unpopular. And this has been admitted by US officials at multiple levels, including CIA, Donald Trump, etc. There has been talk, speculations, allegations, rumors about the Rodriguez Cabello leadership in Venezuela after the kidnapping of President Maduro. If you could clear what has remained of the Maduroismo structure in terms of party structure, in terms of leadership, in terms of its popularity, what remains in Venezuela, I think that would be a good foundation for people to understand what is going on in Venezuela.
Well, for that we need to go back. I think underneath this, the leadership, and that is the base of Chavismo. When Hugo Chavez comes to the presidency in 1999, wins the election, becomes president, he starts a major social upheaval. I mean, he won the presidency in 1998 in the election by building, an electoral base. He brings together different factions of the left. He constructs this immense idea of Bolivarianism, the idea that you got to take Venezuela back to Simon Bolivar's vision. It was incredible politics, incredible to watch him do that. But he knit a base together. And in the first 5 years of government, so roughly from 1999 to 2004, what Mr. Chavez was able to do was he was able to take a section of the oil revenues, obviously not all of it, but a section of the oil revenues, and create social housing, create education programs, take populations that were living in slums, for instance, and say, no, we're going to get rid of these slum housing, and right here, right next to the homes of the middle class, you're going to build an apartment building and you're going to live there. We're not going to evict you. You're going to live there, and your children are going to go to schools, and you're going to get food, and you're going to get a decent life, and you're going to govern yourselves. You're going to become a commune inside this middle class neighborhood. And he produced, therefore, this base of Chavismo. When he died, this base of Chavismo remained with the political formation of Hugo Chavez, which was the Socialist Party. That's the party that Nicolás Maduro then, led into the elections in 2014. And he won by a very slim margin against Henry Capriles. He won by something like 51 to 49. It was extremely tight. Okay. The one thing I can tell you about Venezuela is if they wanted to rig elections, which is what the US and the opposition keep saying they want to do, there is no way you rig an election by winning 51 to 49. You want to rig an election, you take your lessons from Paul Kagame in Rwanda, where you win 99% of the vote, or you take your lessons from Abdul Fattah el-Sisi in Egypt. You win 98% of the vote, or whatever it is. I mean, that's how you rig an election. No, nobody rigs an election 54% to 48%. I mean, that's ridiculous. You got to rig, you rig. Not this. This is not a rigged election. I think it's a pretty good estimation that the Chavista base is a little more than 50% of the population that votes, and the base of the opposition is just under about 45% or so of the population that votes, because that's the numbers we're talking about. The larger population, it's very difficult to tell what the base is, but there's a solid Chavista base. And Nicolas Maduro, again, during the pandemic, during the worst of the sanctions, tried to protect the social policies of Chavismo. The most credible leader of the Chavista base that emerged actually from that base is Diosdoro Caballo. He is the most important reference, as you say in Spanish, of the Chavista base, and he also happens to lead the Socialist Party. Now, very interesting, and the U.S. government knows this. So, in the indictment against Nicolas Maduro Moros and Celia Flores, there are 6 people named in the indictment. One of them is Diosdoro Cabello. He is named in the indictment because the US government knows he is really important to Chavismo. You take this guy out, and that's a problem. Yeah, he's important. Okay, there's lots of levels of leadership, but he's hugely respected and loved. Okay, he plays a role in that. He's a guy of the grassroots. He understands how people think and work. He's a dynamic speaker and so on. And he's also a very good team player, because when Nicolas Maduro Moro was taken, there was no palace intrigue about who's coming next. Delcy Rodríguez was the vice president, and she then becomes acting president. There was no struggle for power. But what she did is actually much more impressive, is that in her first public appearance, she did a televised public appearance. She was sitting right there, and next to her was Diosdoro Cabello. This is a very important symbolic gesture to the Chavista base, that all is good with us. We are not going to walk away from the base. But imagine how this was to the CIA, because that's the guy they want. They want Nicolas Maduro Moro, of course, but they also want Diosdoro. They don't get him, and he's still there. If Delcy Rodriguez had set him aside, then I would have said, okay, this is really not a good situation. We don't know what's going to happen. Okay, as soon as the new National Assembly was seated, she had to move into a kind of reform phase of the hydrocarbons law. Where there are going to be some oil deals, the payments will go through Qatar and so on. I mean, they are in desperate situation economically. Okay, I think they've also understood that all the talk about multipolarity, and I've been on with you before and said multipolarity is a little exaggerated. We are talking about a new mood in the global south. We don't really think there's multipolarity. Okay, there was no Russia coming in to save the day, no China coming in to save the day. They understand the limitations, okay, of their situation. They have to make a deal with the United States. And despite the fact that their president is sitting in a US prison, the first combatant is in a US prison, they're going to have to make a deal. You would have to be somebody who is not responsible for the Venezuelan people to say that this is a sellout. It's very easy for somebody who either doesn't live in Venezuela or is not responsible for the well-being of the Venezuelan people to take some sort of ultra-leftist position. But, she has to protect the city of Caracas from being turned into Gaza. She has to protect the well-being of the Venezuelan people. She has to protect the Bolivarian revolution. She can't afford to be reckless. And I think especially now, given what the United States says, it shows that it can do, where the US is willing to behave recklessly, for Delcy Rodriguez to counter its recklessness with her recklessness from a position of military weakness, it would be suicidal.
I guess that's a very important point. I think this misunderstanding about the global south, given the enormous asymmetry of power. On one side is the US empire, on other side are these smaller global south countries. And sometimes this is obfuscated by rise of China, and people start talking about the decline of US empire, the decline of dollar in certain cases, the loss in the tariff wars, but people don't understand how vulnerable other global south countries are. As you said, Russia or China would not necessarily confront the US when it comes to the US escalation of these regions. Given this reality and given so much talk about the decline of the US empire, some scholars even saying that imperialism as a category has become less relevant, I wonder how would you how do you define these talks under coercions? The mainstream media has presented them as back channel talks. Other, what you have categorized as ultra leftists, some within the left has misunderstood this as not being tough enough. We have seen this in the case of Iran, for instance. When they talk, it's like either it's giving up the principles of revolution, but this is totally lacking understanding of real power. How do you describe these talks about the reforms within the hydrocarbon industries, the talks, diplomatic talks that are going on with Rodriguez and the US administration? If you can put that in perspective, that would be helpful.
See, so the important thing to recognize is that the only leverage that Delcy Rodriguez has right now is the lack of a political partner that the United States is able to find in Venezuela. So, number one, the US has come to understand that the opposition was made in the USA. It was, in fact, a US money from the National Endowment for Democracy and other agencies that created the group Sumate, that out of which Maria Corina Machado becomes an important figure. Leopoldo Lopez, all these people are basically made in the USA. They are constructed by money that comes in from the US, large amounts of money. Ambassador Chris Story, U.S. ambassador, encouraging street revolts and so on. It's quite repulsive when you look at Chris Story's history, what he did when he was the ambassador. So, sitting there in Colombia, dictating the terms to this Venezuelan, really prone. Talk about surrender. This right-wing opposition, they surrendered their integrity to the United States. Yeah. So the United States has come to terms with the idea that, if you have somebody like Maria Corina Machado coming to Trump after all that and laying the Nobel Prize at his feet, like the Gauls being defeated by Caesar, putting their shield at Caesar's feet, she comes and begs Trump to take her back into the fold, and Trump sort of dismisses her, now wants to go to war over Greenland because he says Norway didn't give me the Nobel Prize or whatever it is. The fact is that they don't have a credible opposition. Juan Guaido, not credible. Leopoldo Lopez, very much not credible. He was a gangster. Maria Corina Machado, not credible. Eduardo Gonzalez, even less credible. And then Henry Capriles, who has come into the National Assembly, is seen as the so-called loyal opposition, which is crazy because Henry Capriles has stayed in Venezuela and has fought to build the right-wing opposition, to the Bolivarians, and he is not interested in coming to power by U.S. jets. People like him, and I've interviewed many of these people, say that we don't have a chance of winning a majority in the country because people are not attracted by the message of austerity, of bringing in US oil companies. They are not attracted by that. Yeah. It's not attractive for Venezuelans. So the US government has understood that. Trump said, look, they're useless. Yeah. Okay, fine. Then he said, okay, we're going to appoint Marco Rubio the boss, or how he tweeted that he's the president of Venezuela. Okay, the US has been through this dance before. Yeah, this was called the conquest of Iraq. When they first took Iraq, they said that, okay, we've got an Iraqi. That's the Maria Corina Machado of Iraq. His name is Ahmed Chalabi. Yeah. Turned out Ahmed Chalabi was useless. He was a crooked banker, swindled the banks in Jordan, whatever. They had to discard him quickly. Then they said, okay, fine, we're going to have a viceroy. In fact, they used that term, viceroy, the US viceroy in Iraq. That was Paul Bremer, who was going to run Iraq and that was a real disaster, total corruption and so on. The US doesn't have tools in its toolbox for the political side of things. It has tools in the military side, but nothing politically. So the United States understands that, and I think Delcy Rodriguez understands her only leverage is that the US does not right now have an alternative to whatever government exists in Venezuela at this moment. So she is going to have to negotiate with them. They need her, and she is going to have to deal with it, because if she doesn't talk to them, they're going to attack again. They're going to keep going till they find somebody in the leadership of this government that's going to deal with them. And I think that's a pretty realistic game theory. If you game this out, they're going to come in again. They can assassinate her. They can take her. It doesn't matter. If they don't need her, they shove her aside somehow. Yeah, militarily, because they have that capacity. And then somebody else comes in next, or they come in and they take out Diosdoro. That would be quite calamitous for the Chavista base. They'd have to find another reference. And there are other references. I don't want to make this a one-man issue, but he plays a role. And so, this is a worry. And I get it. I get that they are negotiating, but I also get the fact that they feel stranded, that the allies in the global south have stranded them. And that's, I think, something of real concern. And look how the US did this. Just hours before kidnapping Nicolás Maduro, he meets with Chinese President Xi Jinping's senior envoy. And not only to Mr. Xi, who's the senior envoy of Xi Jinping, he meets the director of Latin American Affairs at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Beijing, the deputy director. All of them are in Miraflores Palace. They meet with Nicolás Maduro. They go back to go to sleep in their beds, and while they are asleep in their beds, United States does this. Please don't tell me that the US government didn't know that they had come, because I knew they had come. I saw it on Twitter while it was happening in Miraflores Palace, or shortly thereafter. They showed photographs of it. Yeah. So the US knew this is happening. They monitor all this in real time. They knew that the senior most official of Xi Jinping and the senior most people from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs were in Caracas, and they didn't say hold for a night, let them leave the thing. They, in my opinion, it's a direct insult to the Chinese. And the Chinese they haven't come out and said, you did this while our high officials were there. Why haven't they made a diplomatic issue of just that? Just that you endangered the life of our senior diplomatic staff. They haven't made a public statement about it. This shows also their reticence to get drawn into this. Yeah, what has the Russians said? Violation of, where's the Russian jet fighters? Russian wash, nothing. So you can imagine how it feels to be stranded with the responsibility of a large number of Venezuelan people on your shoulders.
Given this situation where Venezuelans feel stranded, and given we've seen that international norms, rules, everything have gone for toss, and the US empire in its decline has gone berserk, what are the checks and balances? I'm also thinking about, apart from Venezuela and apart from other nations, I'm also thinking about the core within the US empire, because Trump apparently came to power riding on this facade of America first, which some people thought that there is a core that is against intervention. Maybe some of that is true. I'm not sure how you read people like Steve Bannon and Tucker Carlson, but there is a base which is fatigued from U.S. interventions across the globe. Where does this stop? What is your sense of what is the future of U.S. interventions across the world?
But see, I'm surprised that you, in fact, mentioned Tucker Carlson. I'm surprised that you mentioned that because few days after this illegal raid on Venezuela and the kidnapping of Nicolás Maduro, Donald Trump hosted oil executives in the White House, where he had the executives from Chevron, Exxon, all of them. Who was in the room with him? Tucker Carlson. Tucker Carlson was a special guest, and he was there clapping when Trump walked in, beaming, and so on. Look, don't completely misconstrue people like Tucker Carlson and so on. They are not against US foreign adventures. Do not misconstrue them.
Can I ask a follow up here? Because maybe I think
Yeah,
that might be important for you. Some people make a distinction between Tucker Carlson himself, which there is very little doubt that he doesn't stand on the side that we stand on, but Tucker Carlson riding on a wave of discontentment from a base which some people say is genuinely against US intervention. And these are people not necessarily on the left when it comes to capitalism and so on and so forth, but from within the right, within conservatism and so on, some people say that there is a genuine base which is against US intervention. Tucker
I don't
Carlson,
think so.
you don't think so? Okay.
I don't think so because see, Marjorie Taylor Greene, the congresswoman from Georgia, came out and said to Trump, what are you doing? You said you no foreign interventions. Yeah, I'm not going to run for my seat. I'm not going to run for my seat. Wait a minute. She says, what are you doing? And Trump comes in and just says, you're nothing. And she then decides, okay, I'm not running for my seat. Why? Because it's a politically weak position in the MAGA community. Trump is everything. And listen, that section that says no foreign wars, what they mean is, I don't want my kids to come back dead from Iraq or Afghanistan. But if you're going to go out there and just kidnap the president of Venezuela and give us the oil, we're with you. You're going to get us Greenland, we're with you. You're going to bomb Iran from the air, we're with you. I just don't want my kids to die in the war. And I don't want our precious treasure to be wasted. But if you're using our military to get us the oil and to get us go ahead. That's the level of the anti foreign war. It's not really a commitment to against foreign adventures. It's just that, I don't want my kids to die. Why? Because a section of the MAGA base has children in the military. This is not the elites who don't have children in the military. A section does, and they don't want their kids to die. They saw their eldest kid die in Afghanistan. They don't want the youngest kid to die in Venezuela. So Trump is not sending troops into Venezuela. That's not going to be the issue. He understands the limits. He's going to use the mother of all bombs on Afghanistan. He was the one who dropped that bomb. People have forgotten. He's not a Mr. Peace. Yeah, he bombs everywhere. Yeah, but from the air, where the United States has no threat to its soldiers. There will be very few body bags of US soldiers coming back. It's overwhelming force. 150 military aircraft over the skies of Venezuela, all kinds of weird equipment which made people bleed. I don't even know what the reality is. Yeah, heads exploding. We don't know what happened in that complex. Yeah, we don't really know it yet. But what we do know is he's not going to allow enormous numbers of body bags. That's the limit of his base. The other limit of his base is waste of money. It's not going to happen. He's going to keep saying, look, we didn't waste money, even though you do a calculation. The US taxpayer is paying for the raid and the bombs and all of that. And it's ExxonMobil that's going to win the prize. So it's not really the same people. But that bluff has been going on for a long time. I don't think it's there's a limit to the base's appetite for Trump to go against Greenland, Canada, whatever. If he keeps winning, so-called, they are happy with him. So Tucker Carlson is not credible in any way. I mean, when you make that distinction, it doesn't fly because if that distinction were true, then why would he allow himself to be at a public event where he's clapping after a foreign intervention? He knows his base supports the attack on Venezuela. It shows that America's strong. Remember, they are America first. They are not America isolationist. That's what Marjorie Taylor Greene didn't understand. She thought this means Trump use our money to take care of my constituents in Georgia. No, these are not isolationists. That's a America isolationist approach. These are America first, which means reconstruct U.S. hegemony, whatever it takes. Does it take an atom bomb in somewhere in Asia? Go ahead. We don't care. We are American. I mean, that's the kind of Trump base we are dealing with. It doesn't have limits on this. The limit is the body bag. The limit is if it thinks its money is being wasted on adventures abroad.
Yeah. I guess on the left, we don't make that distinctions that often because we have been saying that you have to be principally and ideologically aligned on one side to be genuinely anti-imperialistic. I mean, you cannot disregard much of the working class of the global south. You cannot ignore the labor aristocracy within the imperial heartland and then talk about non-intervention, because ultimately you are the people whose language about immigrant workers, whose language about people who are doing the manual work is so grotesque that you can't just have an anti-intervention, genuine anti-intervention position in Latin America, but also across the globe. But yeah, I do interview conservative thinkers on foreign policy, people like Colonel Wilkerson, who do argue from within a conservative base. I don't agree with him on things like state spending, on questions of efficiency on private sector versus public sector, on what to do with rent, etc. But while I interview them, I do feel that there is a conservative, maybe within the think tank. I'm not sure how wide that base is actually, but within the think tank, there is a section from traditional conservatism whose understanding of capitalism is very flawed, whose understanding of imperialism as integral part of capitalism and all are very flawed, but nevertheless they seem to be exhausted and principally opposed to things like military intervention or even the presence of
Yeah,
US empire.
yeah, but the thing is, see, firstly, okay, that's fine, and it's all very well, but that's a form of genteel critique. It's a critique of genteelness. In other words, they were fine when the CIA was doing covert things where they were overthrowing governments, and I mean Colonel Wilkerson, for instance, was the number two to Colin Powell when Colin Powell went into the chamber of the United Nations Security Council and lied about weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, and later Colonel Wilkerson said, well, the CIA lied to them. I mean, this is Colin Powell we're talking about, and Larry Wilkerson. I mean, how do you get taken for a ride by the CIA? When the rest of us outside were saying this is ridiculous, that it doesn't add up. I mean, you guys are torturing people and getting evidence. We know that torture, it's only after the fact. I mean, I don't trust their judgment at all. I know that Mr. Wilkerson and I have shared, platforms together on Zoom and have been in a film together and so on. But I don't trust their judgment. I mean, where were you when you were in the military and you were absolutely, I suppose, okay with the U.S. anti-terror conflicts in the 1990s when the US was bombing Yemen, doing this, bombing Sudan, bombed a pharmaceutical factory, the Al Shifa factory in Khartoum in Sudan, the only factory that produced a number of important life-saving drugs in Eastern Africa. I mean, where were they then? Why didn't they resign then? Or why didn't they speak then? Why haven't they spoken about that there? The judgment of the genteel conservative critics of Trump is meaningless to me because when it counted, they remained silent. Because of the vulgarity of Trump, they are put off. They are put off by his vulgarity more than the fact of the US can go and overthrow a bad actor abroad. They seem quite okay with that, frankly. I don't I have yet to see that section of genteel conservatives go back and address their own pasts. Yeah, the kinds of things that they supported, to give us an account of that. I mean, how is it possible that you are upset with Trump now, but you are okay with Clinton doing something or somebody else doing something else, or how were you okay with how the United States dealt with the Iranian Revolution and then the Islamic Republic? How are you okay with the U.S. providing chemical weapons to Saddam Hussein to use against young Iranian soldiers at the front? You know, tossing mustard gas at them. I mean, how are you okay with that? So I'm afraid I have very little patience for their genteel criticism, because their criticism is about tone. It's about way of doing things. It's not a criticism, as you just said, of the structure, but even tone. I mean, what tone, man? Entire youth were gassed with mustard in Iran. You talk about, oh, in Iran is this. If Iran didn't have to face the attack from Iraq in 1980 and didn't have to face 8 years of war, the government would not be so paranoid. The government would have been much more open to the world. It would have been much less in a siege mentality. Yeah. Now you say, oh, they are so close minded. Well, guess who made them close minded? Yeah, they are not close minded. In fact, they are quite rational because they know what you are capable of doing to them. And so they are always prepared and scared of what kind of horrors you can inflict on them. 20 people come on the street in Tehran, they're immediately going to say this is created from outside. Why? Because this is exactly what you do to them. You inflict this on them. You create the social structure of paranoia. It's not something that comes from within the Iranian Revolution or the Islamic Republic. It's imposed on them. So these are the genteel critics. Yeah, I mean, I went on a little rant, but for God's sake, guys, wake up to your own realities. Yeah, when you're critical of Donald Trump now on Venezuela, you got to understand you don't have a base in the United States that follows you. Your base now is the liberal base, bizarrely. It's the liberal base. Where do people like Lawrence Wilkerson, what kind of programs do they come on? Yeah, they come on liberal and left programs. They are not invited to go to the right wing shows on Fox and so on. Then nobody takes them seriously.
I wanted to ask you very briefly on given your answer, for me, it's a broad discussion about left strategy to multiple strands of political thinking and political base. I was also wondering your thoughts on a section of the working class, let's say in the West, which is genuinely disillusioned by corporate America or corporate Western capitalism, against landlordism, against rent, against insurance company, particularly on health, but also car insurance, big banks, pharmaceuticals, etc. But these are the people who are not necessarily critique of capitalism, critique of profit per se. So, as someone on the left, what would be your strategy to the working class that doesn't have a comprehensive critique of capitalism, but has been definitely disillusioned by corporatism and large sections of inequality of power and wealth?
Well, the first thing to say is that this is not actually restricted to the West or the global North. This is a problem of what you have to consider money democracy. Okay, so in India, for instance, you can have a general strike every year. 250 million workers go on strike. You had millions of farmers gather around Delhi, in a big farmer strike and so on. In Brazil, you have very large, manifestations. Again, landless workers, trade unions, enormous manifestations, and so on. Can't convert it into electoral power. They have a certain kind of political strength on the ground, but they can't convert it into electoral power. What's the problem? What's going on? In Europe, in France, you have enormous manifestations against the reform of the retirement age. You have protests on pensions, enormous demonstrations. Yeah, Paris under convulsion, farmers driving their tractors into the city cannot really convert it into electoral gains. What is going on? I have a feeling the problem here is less on the working class has been, doesn't have a critique of. You don't need a critique of capitalism to be able to come to power in an election on a reform slate. You don't need a critique of capitalism. We don't even have the reform slates winning elections. Yeah, in the United States, you don't even have a party that wants to reform the structure. You don't even have that. Bernie Sanders barnstorms through the country, large rallies and so on, with a genuine reform slate. Yeah, he's not a radical, he's not anti-capitalist, he's not even anti-imperialist, but he has a genuine thing. Healthcare, the things you mentioned, healthcare, insurance, this, that, and the other. Yeah, galvanized, but not permitted to be in the main election. Yeah, this happens over and over again. There is a problem with democracy, and we have to face this fact. It's not just a question of ideology, that the working class doesn't have the quote unquote correct ideology. No, I mean, if they had faith in the political process, people might actually participate in it. Yeah, but the political process is money. In India, 80% or more of this vast election money that we know above the waters, we don't know what's underneath, what the rest of the iceberg of money looks like, the illegal money. But of the legal money, over 80%, I'm told, goes to the BJP. So then the question is, these are money elections. There's a way in which the system prevents genuine candidates who have call it what one will. I mean, a people's agenda, not a radical agenda, people's agenda. On these very issues you talked about, the basic reforms. Yeah, they just don't get a place in the structure. They get set aside. This happens all the time. Again, it's not just a global north, global south thing. It's an election problem. We have a problem with the systems of elections. They just don't permit certain kind of agendas. And we're not talking about radicalism. That's actually the stunning thing, is you don't need to be a radical to be shut out of the system. Again, the examples are in the United States, Bernie Sanders; in the UK, Jeremy Corbyn; and then in France, Jean-Luc Mélenchon. I mean, the French, by, I don't know, some extraordinary turn of events, have the largest bloc in the National Assembly in France. They have a right to claim the prime minister's chair, but Emmanuel Macron, our president, just won't let them be the prime minister. He will put in as prime minister a person with one seat rather than the largest bloc, and somehow that's legal in France. So this is a serious issue. Imagine for the public that votes for the left bloc in the French parliament. Then they're going to think, what's the point of electing the left? They don't have any ability to convert it. Let's just vote for Jean-Marie Le Pen and let her come in and she'll shake things up. I mean, if you want reform and you want your whatever it is, retirement age to protect it, you think maybe she'll do it, because they can't do it. They can't fight Macron. We need somebody who can fight him. So in that sense, it's not an ideology issue alone. Okay, maybe there's some partly ideology. It's got something to do with the systems that we have. The electoral, they are simply not democratic. That's the problem. That you have elections and then you have democracy. But you don't really, like in the United States, you don't have a democratic election system, nor in Britain, nor in France. I mean, in Britain, how did Keir Starmer's Labour get such an overwhelming majority in the House of Commons? They didn't get an overwhelming share of the vote. That's something to do with the system. That's bizarre. In India, you can, if you can win the election with 15% of the vote. Yeah, if you are the largest vote getter in that district, so what do? You pay 50 candidates to run. You pick a fellow. Okay, I'm running from the Congress party. My name is Vijay Prasad. The BJP will find another fellow named Vijay Prasad and put him up there, and put him in some other. It'll confuse the electorate. Which Vijay Prasad am I voting for? There's four of them. Yeah, and then their candidate wins by 20% or 18%. What kind of this is not democracy, it's an election. I'll give it to you. It's an election. Why should I? I'm not living on another planet. It's definitely an election. Yeah, it's definitely voting happening, but it's definitely not democracy. So therefore, I don't know if it's entirely an ideological issue. I think it's also a democracy problem.
Yeah, I guess you and I have the same view about elections and um, how much they lack actual popular legitimacy. I mean, it's just money power. Ultimately, there is this question of who do you go to if you have to win elections? And a lot of people said that to the voters, but the real answer is to those who have the resources, the media outlet, those who provide you helicopters and buses and free money and so on and so forth. And at the end of the day, you may or may not go to your voters, but you would win the elections if you have media and helicopters and transportations and so on and so forth. So actually I was not thinking about elections. I was thinking about people's understanding of the economic system itself. And given my interest in economics, I've been talking to people about their perception, their understanding, and experience about the economic system. And when I talk about the specificity and when I discuss the specificity of our economic systems, be that about how food is distributed within our economic system, or how rent is monopolized, etc., etc. I feel that, or how public sector has been contractualized and privatized. I recently went to a powerhouse, the power sector in India, and I had a little survey. And they are running 27 permanent workers on a staff of overall 135. So the amount of contractualization that has been happening across the world is part of our larger understanding of, it's part of neoliberal capitalism. And yet, as leftists, we see the shift that there is a tremendous discontentment about contractualization and privatization, but people don't use the word capitalism like they used to do up until the 1970s, or I did some research on 1920s, 1930s, and where language about capitalism is used in those sources, the way it is used along with imperialism and how illegitimate capitalism was considered as a system, people don't necessarily at large use capitalism. And that's what I was wondering, given your statement about imperialism was that unless and until you have a comprehensive understanding of imperialism, your gentle critique is not worth my time. But would you apply the same logic to the gentile critique of capitalism? That was my query.
So this all of this has to do with how are you able to understand a system. First, you understand the system based on your own experience of it. Yeah. So, for instance, that's why I said with imperialism, a population said, "I don't want to see my child come back dead from a foreign war." So, my understanding of imperialism, or what I'm against, is you sending my child overseas to be killed. If other people are dying, that doesn't bother me. But that idea that I don't want my kid to go abroad to get killed is the beginning of a conversation about the imperialist system. That person has a vested interest in understanding about your kid goes abroad to die, not to defend your country, but to defend this system. That's the beginning of so you have actually a personal experience, one of a child dying, but two of the potential of a child dying. Somebody said, I don't want my child to go and die. So that's actually, you have a material stake in the conversation. You don't have, you're not talking theoretically, you have an actual material stake. And there you can actually have an interesting conversation about what does it mean. So you need a political force to come into the lives of people to have that conversation. Now, unfortunately, I come to elections because elections is when people are attuned to having these conversations. And if you can't do that, then people cannot take, in a sense, the material reality of their understanding of imperialism and build it into a larger theory. Similarly with capitalism. Yeah, somebody says, look, I can't pay my hospital bills, I'm going broke, or insurance premiums have gone up, or why should the retirement age change, and so on. You're experiencing the tentacles of the capitalist system, but you're not necessarily seeing the whole system. Nobody sees the whole system. Even the most sophisticated analysts keep trying to put the system together. Yeah, that's the nature of analysis. You get a whole bunch of discrete points and you try to join the dots. So people see 3, 4, 5, 6 in their own experience. The working class sees a lot of the points in their own experience. The question is how you put it together. Yeah, the simplest way to put it together is say my boss is a horrible person. Yeah, you personalize the issue. My boss is horrible. I got the wrong insurance company. I should have got the other carrier. You were right. You warned me. I'm an idiot. Yeah, you individualize it. You make it about bad consumer choices and so on. Yeah, these are ways in which you, in a way, mute out the points of experience of the system. But again, it begs the question: is you need a political formation in your life that is available. Somebody saying to you, wait a minute, it's actually not your fault, because if you pick this company or that company or the other company, they may have marginal differences, true, but they're all pretty bad. Yeah, if you go to ChatGPT and say, ChatGPT, these are 5 insurance plans, which is the best one, chances are that ChatGPT is going to come back to you and say, well, I've listed them in the order of which is the worst. Yeah, but this one is better than the others, because you didn't ask it, are they all the same? Yeah, are they all part of the capitalist system? The question you asked is which is the best. Why? Because you have to survive, you have to buy insurance. So you need to know which is the best. It becomes consumer choice. You understand? It's not, what happens is that when you have a bad experience with the capitalist system, you think, well, this airline is bad. If I only took the other airline. So consumer, these are all ways you mute it. Somebody has to politicize it for you. It's not necessarily a spontaneous thing. You can have mass demonstrations against United Airlines, for instance, or against some issue, but that spontaneous demonstration or that spontaneous is not necessarily politicizing. Yeah, it politicizes you in that you have confidence in your ability to be political. You still need somebody out there to be putting the dots together. That means you need some political references. And again, we come back to elections. If the electoral system is so suffocating that you don't have political references there, if the Bernie Sanders, they're not allowed to even develop a social democratic ideology. And then the left, the hard left, gets completely marginalized because it doesn't actually appear at the time of politics and talk at the level of people. It's just telling you capitalism is doom. It's a kind of in the land of doom. Yeah. But for people, you have to be at the level of their dots and connect them. And communicators like Jeremy Corbyn, Bernie, these are very good communicators at the level of the dots. Yeah. But they themselves, if they are being shut out, imagine the problem. So I'm saying to you that it's not that the elections thing is a separate conversation. It's in fact about the strategic path to lift up you can't just have a research institute or a think tank, or you write a PhD and the working class says, oh, Jyotisman has written a PhD, now we got it. Yeah, how are they going to know your PhD exists? Yeah, what's the means of communication from your PhD to their understanding of their dots? Somebody has to mediate that, and that's a political force, I'm afraid. And so then you come back to the whole question of what is the understanding of politics, because that mediation is just not available in most societies. Yeah, in India, you have major left parties. They are the mediating force. You have trade unions. They are the mediating force. But you also have 1.5 billion people. And these organizations are very small. They don't have the capacity to to get to every household, to go door to door and have the conversation, with hundreds of millions of people, because that's what you have to do.
Yeah, we'll leave it there in the interest of your time, but I wanted to discuss what's going on in Venezuela, and at the same time, I wanted to have this alongside a broader understanding of imperialism and capitalism, given the mainstream media always discusses these developments as specific events and ignores the larger framework of imperialism and capitalism. Vijay, it was wonderful as always. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks a lot.
All right.
Hi, my name is Ayushman. I, along with Jyotisman, have started this platform. In the last 2 years, we have tried to build content for the left and progressive forces. We have interviewed economists, historians, political commentators, and activists so far. If you have liked our content so far and want us to build an archive for the left, I have two requests for you. Please do consider donating for the cause. Link is in the description below. Also, if you are not able to do so, don't feel sad. You can always like our videos and share our videos to your comrades. Finally, don't forget to hit the subscribe button.